was not. Julian Ward signed his name with dramatic flourish, dragging the black ink slowly across the final page of their divorce decree. He didn't just sign it, he performed it. Sitting across from him, Elena Brooks kept her eyes fixed on the table, but her hand rested lightly on an old silver fountain pen, one that once belonged to her father, Arthur Brooks, the famed novelist everyone in that room pretended not to recognize. Julian looked up, pen still twirling between his fingers. "Well," he said with a half-laugh, "I suppose the fairy tale's over. Too bad about the ending." The judge didn't react. Elena didn't blink. Inside, her stomach coiled. Not from heartbreak. That part had withered months ago. What tightened her chest was the way Julian smiled. Like he had won. Like she had been just another stepping stone on the path to his literary career. He had always admired her father, quoted him, obsessed over his legacy. And once Arthur Brooks died, Julian wasted no time carving a piece of it for himself. Elena remembered the first time she caught Julian reading through her father's unpublished manuscripts. He said it was just research, that it was inspiring. Back then, she believed him. Back then, she believed in a lot of things. The pen between her fingers now was the one her father used to write every first draft. Julian had once asked to use it. She said no. He used her instead. Julian pushed the signed pages towards the judge and leaned back, casual and victorious. "All done. Hope you find someone less boring next time." Elena said nothing. She had promised herself, "Not one tear, not one twitch." The judge adjusted his glasses, then reached into a folder. "There is one final matter," he said. "This court has received a sealed document, submitted posthumously by Mr. Arthur Brooks, regarding the literary estate in question." Julian's smirk faded. Elena raised her eyes. Slowly, the judge lifted an envelope, thick ivory with a deep red wax seal. The initials A.B. were pressed firmly in the center. The courtroom air tightened. Julian sat up straighter. "Wait, what document? Why wasn't I told?" "This envelope was delivered to the court with specific instructions, to be opened only during these proceedings, in the event that Mr. Julian Ward attempts to claim ownership or authorship of any intellectual property linked to Mr. Brooks's legacy." Julian's jaw clenched. "That's absurd. This is a divorce, not a copyright case." But Elena already knew. She knew exactly what was inside that envelope, and she knew the exact moment her father had written it. Her voice was quiet, barely audible to anyone but him. "He saw you coming, Julian, long before I did." The judge broke the seal. The wax cracked like thunder in Julian's ears. Elena's fingers tightened around the silver pen. He had built a life on borrowed brilliance. But the man who thought he could rewrite her story was about to be erased by the author who loved her most. And just before the judge began to read, I realized something I hadn't dared to hope in months. This wasn't the end of the story. It was the prologue to his ruin. If you had asked anyone just 2 years ago, they would have said I was the luckiest woman they knew. I had a calm job as a university librarian, a peaceful little apartment near the river, and a husband who taught literature and spoke on panels. People used words like graceful, elegant, and reserved when they described me, never knowing that what they were really describing was someone carefully erasing herself for someone else's spotlight. I wasn't loud. I didn't need attention. I liked the rustle of pages, the scent of old books, the stillness of stories waiting to be opened. But Julian Ward hated the quiet. He wanted applause, and when we got married, I think a part of him believed he had married into legacy. My legacy. My father's. Arthur Brooks wasn't just a writer. He was a literary force. His novels were taught in universities, quoted by politicians, whispered between readers like scripture. He wrote with fire and elegance, and he never cared for fame. That was what made him beloved. Julian used to sit on our living room floor, surrounded by my father's early works, tracing his finger along the margin notes in pencil. He said they were divine. I thought it was devotion. Now I know it was research. When we first met, Julian seemed magnetic. His words felt like honey, his eyes always filled with admiration. He told me I was unlike anyone he'd ever met. But what he really meant was that I was unlike anyone who would ever challenge him. He was always the loudest voice at dinner parties, the man who quoted Rilke before dessert. People adored him, and slowly I faded. Willingly at first. After my father passed, Julian insisted we keep the study as it was. A shrine, he said, to greatness. But I began to notice things missing, little things. A handwritten draft that had sat on the second shelf for years. The fountain pen, my father's, had been borrowed and returned scratched. A quote from a private letter suddenly appeared in Julian's new novel. I asked once, gently, "Did you take Dad's old story outline?" He smiled too easily. "Of course not, but if I did, wouldn't it be fair inspiration? He was your father. Our family. Our family." That word clanged in my ears. At faculty events, people praised Julian's new book, called it Brooksian in tone, but with youthful fire. He soaked it in, never once mentioned where the tone came from, and I said nothing. Because for years I had been taught, by silence, by culture, by watching my mother, that grace meant never making a scene. But inside me, something tightened every time he smiled too long at praise. Every time he described me in interviews as his anchor while taking wind for his own sails. Then came the day I found the document. A full draft, unedited, unformatted, tucked into Julian's desk drawer. Not in his handwriting. My father's. Dated 8 years earlier. It was the same plot, the same twist, the same metaphor. Julian had copied nearly everything, and just changed the names. I sat there, staring at it for hours, my mind numb, my hands trembling. It was like finding fingerprints at a crime scene. But the burglar lived in my house, ate at my table, and wore a wedding ring with my name on it. That night, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I walked into my father's study, shut the door, and cried for the version of me that still believed this was love. On the desk, the silver fountain pen waited like a ghost. I picked it up and wrote a single line in the blank margin of one of his old notebooks. Strength isn't staying silent, it's knowing when to speak. I didn't know it yet, but that line would become the line I whispered in court, the one Julian would never forget. But before I could say a word to him, something happened. Something that told me I wasn't alone in what I had seen, and my father hadn't been blind before he died. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and quiet, the kind of day Elena Brooks usually loved. Rain tapped against the library windows, and the scent of paper filled the air like incense. But on that day, she wasn't cataloging books or refiling returns. She was staring at the door. Julian hadn't come home the night before. Not that it was new. Lately, late nights at the office had become normal. So had unexplained trips, mumbled calls in the other room, perfume that wasn't hers. But she had stopped asking. She told herself it wasn't her business anymore. Their lives were already splitting down the middle. Emotionally, she had already left. But what she hadn't expected, what truly rattled her, was that someone else knew. She was shelving a stack of poetry anthologies when the door to the staff-only section opened. No one should have been there. She turned and saw a woman standing in the threshold. Tall, sharp eyes, confidence wrapped around her like armor. "Elena Brooks?" the woman asked, voice low, professional. "Yes? I'm Nadia Voss. I represent Hargrave Literary Management. Elena froze. Hargrave was Julian's new agency, the one that had landed him the six-figure deal. I think there's been a mistake. This is a university library. I'm not— But Nadia shook her head. Actually, I'm here about Arthur Brooks. The name stopped Elena cold. Nadia stepped forward. I recently acquired a folder of archived materials from your father's previous editor. Notes, drafts, and a contract dated nearly 12 years ago. It appears your father had submitted a manuscript, one that bears an alarming resemblance to your husband's debut novel. Elena didn't speak. She couldn't. I wanted to come directly to you before this goes public, Nadia continued. I believe your father's unpublished work was taken, possibly repurposed without permission. Julian's book. The one everyone praised. The one that launched him. Elena felt the edges of her world tilt. She had suspected, yes, but suspicion is a whisper. This was thunder. Do you have the manuscript? Elena asked quietly. Nadia reached into her bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. A photocopy. The original is in our archive, but you should see it. Elena took it with trembling hands. That night, she read the pages under a single lamp. Rain still falling against the window. Her father's handwriting was unmistakable. His voice was there in every paragraph. The rhythm, the themes, the metaphor of the orchard tree. Everything. And Julian's version? Almost word for word. Except he'd stripped the soul and replaced it with flair. He made the story louder, prettier, shallower. But the skeleton was Arthur Brooks, and now she had proof. The next morning she returned to the library early, the envelope still in her bag, close to her ribs. She walked past Julian's published book on the faculty authors shelf, pulled it out, and flipped through it. On the dedication page it read, "To E.B., who steadied my hand when I wrote, and to A.B., whose brilliance lit the path." She nearly laughed. Julian had thanked the very man he stole from, because he knew no one would ever look too closely. Until now. Later that day, she visited her father's study. She hadn't entered in weeks. Dust hung like silence in the air. She set the envelope on the desk and whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" She opened the desk drawer carefully, and there it was, a black leather notebook she hadn't seen before. Tucked underneath were bank transfer slips, copies of email printouts, even a scribbled note in her father's hand. If he publishes it, this will protect her. Her knees buckled. Her father hadn't just seen Julian. He had prepared for war, and that's when I realized my father hadn't left me behind. He'd left me a weapon. All I had to do was choose to use it. The confrontation didn't come with slamming doors or shouting voices. That would have made it easier. No, it came quietly, like most of Julian Ward's betrayals. It was Thursday evening. The sky outside their apartment was bleeding orange into dusk. Elena stood in the kitchen, the copy of her father's manuscript still sealed in her bag, tucked behind her back like a secret waiting to be spoken. Julian walked in humming. "Elle," he called out, as if they hadn't been sleeping in different rooms for weeks. "You won't believe the article they wrote about me in Litline. They're calling me a voice that echoes the legacy of Brooks. Can you imagine?" She said nothing. He walked into the kitchen, loosened his tie, kissed her cheek without waiting for permission. "What's for dinner?" She turned slowly. "Did you ever meet my father's first editor?" Julian blinked. Elijah Crane," she said. "Small office. Only published 3 authors in his entire career." Julian tilted his head, calculating. "I think I've heard the name." "Why?" She studied his face, the twitch in his left cheek, the smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "His archive was transferred to Hargrave Management." "Oh?" Julian sipped water. "That's your father's old agency, isn't it?" She let the silence hang. Then, deliberately, she set a photocopy of the manuscript on the table. Julian stared. and froze. "Elena," he started. She didn't move. "I haven't read your new book in a while. Remind me, how does it end?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. The facade cracked, just a hairline. "Elena, this is a misunderstanding. Look, authors borrow ideas all the time. Inspiration isn't theft." She said nothing. He took a step forward. "Come on. You know how much I admired your father. You know how close we were. I was honoring him." She raised her eyes, finally, calm, flat. "You dedicated the book you stole to the man you stole it from." Julian's breath caught. "Elena, listen, if this goes to court—" "It's not in court yet." He paled. "You wouldn't. It's your name too, your father's legacy. Do you really want the world digging through that?" And there it was, the first glimpse of real fear in Julian Ward. Not for what he had done, but for the consequences he couldn't control. That night, Elena sat alone on the balcony. The city lights blurred below like a memory she couldn't quite focus. Her hands were cold. Her chest felt hollow. She had spoken the truth. Finally. But instead of feeling lighter, she felt exposed. She remembered something her father once told her when she was 16. Some men don't fear being wrong. They fear being seen. The next morning, Julian was gone. Not gone as in vanished, but gone in the way cowards disappear before a storm. His side of the bed was empty. No note, no apology. Just his book, still lying open on the counter, like he wanted it to remind her of his version of the truth. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to read lies anymore. Later that day, she called Leah Kim, her childhood friend, now a litigator with steel in her voice and scars behind her smile. Elena hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the funeral. Leah picked up after the second ring. "Elena? I need help." "Legal?" "Personal," Elena whispered. "But also, yes, very legal." There was a pause. Then Leah said, "Tell me everything," and Elena did. By the time I finished, Leah didn't ask if we should take him down. She asked how fast I needed it to happen. Leah Kim didn't ask for time. She asked for facts. 2 hours after Elena hung up, Leah was in her apartment with coffee, 3 legal pads, and a voice recorder. "I don't want to just protect you," she said. "I want to expose him, fully, publicly." Elena stared at her friend. Polished blazer, sharp eyes, that unshakable calm she remembered from childhood. "You really think we can win?" "I don't think," Leah said, flipping open a notebook. "I know." Over the next several days, they met in Arthur Brooks's old study. Elena hadn't realized how much dust had settled on the bookshelves, or how loud silence could be when you were filling it with truth. They spread out documents